Hi, BookTube, and welcome to Middlemarch Meditation. Yes, you were very kind to allow me to have a month off from doing these meditations in September, but now I want to get back to business. Yes, welcome back, everyone. Today, we're going to finish chapter 20, and that's ambitious, because that's 7 pages that we've got left, and that's twice as much as we normally cover. And the only reason I'm attempting that is because as I studied this chapter and I was preparing my notes, I could see that on balance, Eliot was spending less time, as she normally does, referencing cultural events, religious texts, mythical texts, scientific discoveries, and all the other stuff that she normally does, which needs a lot of rabbit hole discussion. And what she was doing now was playing psychotherapist, if you like, to one of her characters. She's done that before, hasn't she, with Dr. Lidgett. Today, in chapter 20, she's doing it with Dorothea Brooke. This part of the chapter reminded me so much of Eliot's earlier novel, The Mill on the Floss. And that's because I feel that during these 7 pages, the protagonist, in this case Dorothea, but in the case of The Mill on the Floss, we had Maggie Tulliver. Both young women experience their sexual awakening, but of course, they don't recognize the symptoms of that because they have been so well protected from any knowledge of themselves. And also, of course, Victorian English culture really didn't believe that women had such feelings. But that, I think, is what is being examined here, is Dorothea Brooke's own sexual awakening and sexual frustration. And that might not be easy for a modern reader who opens up chapter 20 and reads it. They might not immediately go, aha, yes, I see that. Because, of course, no Victorian novel could speak openly and plainly about such matters. You had to deal with them metaphorically. And that's exactly what Eliot does in this chapter. You will see metaphors of water and fluidity and warmth being used. And these were similar to the kind of metaphors that she was using of the river and currents and being taken along with currents, that if you read Mill in the Floss, you would see them there. I'll read a bit of Mill on the Floss so that you can get an idea. And I'm going to go backwards, I suppose. What I have been doing in the latest meditations is reading all the text through and then coming back and commentating. But there's too many pages here. So I think I'm going to go 1 page at a time, read, commentate, read, commentate. I don't think that will lose anything because there aren't a lot of things to do deep dives on in this chapter. I do feel that you will experience the tension in these 7 pages, the erotic tension that is there. And maybe that's why I feel that I can cover more. If I read the text well, I'm hoping that you will sense Dorothea's frustration that she's not getting the kind of attention that she doesn't know she needs, but she needs. And what I want you to look out for too, as you see the pictures come on screen with my annotations, is things that I have underlined in 2 colors, in red and blue. And red, I'm thinking of qualities that are cold, dry, distant, intellectual, or by association, lifeless, without energy. You will see a lot of those metaphors being associated with Mr. Casaubon, and also the situation in the marriage. And on the other hand, there'll be things underlined in blue, and they will be thinking of qualities that are warm and fluid and emotional, and they will be associated with Dorothea and what's going on inside her that she simply does not understand because she's had no one to help her to understand herself. In case you are wondering now, where did we leave off? We were at the top of page 196 in this edition, the first sentence in the 2nd paragraph. Here we go. In their conversation before marriage, Mr. Casaubon had often dwelt on some explanation or questionable detail of which Dorothea did not see the bearing, but such imperfect coherence seemed due to the brokenness of their intercourse, and supported by her faith in their future, she had listened with fervid patience to a recitation of possible arguments to be brought against Mr. Casaubon's entirely new view of the Philistine god Dagon and other fish deities, thinking that hereafter she should see this subject which touched him so nearly from the same high ground where doubtless it had become so important to him. Again, the matter-of-course statement and tone of dismissal with which he treated what to her were the most stirring thoughts was easily accounted for as belonging to the sense of haste and preoccupation in which she herself shared during their engagement. But now, since they had been in Rome, with all the depths of her emotion roused to tumultuous activity, and with life made a new problem by new elements, she had been becoming more and more aware, with a certain terror, that her mind was continually sliding into inward fits of anger or repulsion, or else into forlorn weariness. How far the judicious Hooker or any other hero of erudition would have been the same at Mr. Casaubon's time of life she had no means of knowing, so that he could not have the advantage of comparison. But her husband's way of commenting on the strangely impressive objects around them had begun to affect her with a sort of mental shiver. He had perhaps the best intention of acquitting himself worthily, but only of acquitting himself. What was fresh to her mind was worn out to his, and such capacity of thought and feeling as had ever been stimulated in him by the general life of mankind had long shrunk to a sort of dried preparation, a lifeless embalmment of knowledge. When he said, "Does this interest you, Dorothea? Shall we stay a little longer? I am ready to stay if you wish it." It seemed to her as if going or staying were alike dreary. "Or should you like to go to the Farnesina, Dorothea? It contains celebrated frescoes designed or painted by Raphael, which most persons think it worth while to visit." "But do you care about them?" was always Dorothea's question. And now to commentary. So we see Dorothea now reviewing the short time that she's known Mr. Casaubon, her engagement and her marriage, and finding that she seems to be changing the way she responds to the way her husband speaks to her, which is very interesting. We're going to focus on the little rabbit hole that we can, because this page happens to talk about Mr. Casaubon's fascination, and he obviously has some new theory about the Philistine god Dagon and other fish deities. And of course, there are so many of these in the ancient Near East. The zodiac sign I was born under, Capricorn, is some sort of creature with the body of a goat and the tail of a fish. There isn't really a lot of information about these deities in the Near East, but there's evidence of a god with fish parts or a fishy sort of cloak or garment in ancient Sumer, in ancient Assyria, and also in ancient Palestine. Dagon is mentioned in the Old Testament. That's really the documentarily, that's the most that we know about Dagon, really. If the Old Testament had not, wanted to concern itself, we may or may not know about him. I've copied a link in my description box, which goes to the Jewish Encyclopedia entry for Dagon. And that's mainly because it states this: as regards the worship of Dagon, very little is known. And so it goes on to talk about what few passages there are in the Old Testament that give you some idea of this deity. And if a contemporary encyclopedia is telling us that very little can be said about Dagon or any other Near Eastern deity with parts of his body being replaced by a fish's tail, then you have to wonder where Mr. Casaubon or his imagined critics, the people he believes might argue with him about this theory of his, where does he even get enough information to debate whatever it is he thinks he needs to debate? And if we hark back to earlier chapters in the novel, we know that we've seen examples where Mr. Casaubon, he's even confessed I think it was at Mr. Brooks' dinner table, that his mind is more in the past than it is in present reality. And this remainder of chapter 20 is definitely going to demonstrate that. Now, let's look at the markings that I put on page 196 and just review those red and blue markings. Obviously, the Philistine god Dagon and all his fish deities I marked in blue because, of course, this is a mention of water, and I don't think it's coincidental that Eliot chose Mr. Casaubon's particular fascination with these deities. It's water that she wants to make a metaphorical theme for the remainder of this chapter. And yet Dorothea wants to regard all this conversation about these deities from the same high ground. Mr. Casaubon doesn't himself, I guess you have to use the word, sink into the psychological impact of these metaphors. He's not Carl Jung. He doesn't think, wait a minute, when humans use this symbolism, what else might they be referring to? He simply wants to, he has his own stuffy, dry theories, and even Dorothea realizes that she needs some kind of other level of understanding to see whatever it is that he sees. But that high ground, of course, is actually away from water. We think of that. So if we associate water with the erotic, the emotional, the psychological, the subconscious, then wherever Mr. Casaubon is as far away from that as possible. Not so with Dorothea. And so she talks about how there are stirring thoughts, how with all the depths of her emotion roused to tumultuous activity, there is something in her that is stirring and she does not understand it. And of course she talks about how her mind was continually sliding into inward fits of anger and repulsion. And that is because she is beginning to see that from her husband she simply isn't getting any kind of emotional return on her investment. This whole section is confirming that in this marriage there has been no sexual activity. And that, I think that compounds Dorothea's frustration, although she does not realize it. And you can see her pleading, trying to get something emotional out of her husband. When he talks about, would she like to go to the Farnesina and see these incredible frescoes designed and painted by Raphael, which he says other people, most people, some other humans, think it worthwhile to visit. She wants to know, do you care about, and I don't know whether I put the emphasis correctly, because I said, do you care? But maybe what she wants to say was, do you care about them? It could be either. I think she's just desperate to draw from her husband some emotional closeness. Just, can I please understand what's important to you? We can take the sexual aspect out, but she's wanting a psychological intimacy. She certainly understands that emotional intimacy should be part of marriage, whether she understands anything else. And she's not getting that either, and that is building her frustration. So she desperately is trying to pull out from him something emotional that she can connect with. We read on. But do you care about them? Was always Dorothea's question. They are, I believe, highly esteemed. Some of them represent the fable of Cupid and Psyche, which is probably the romantic invention of a literary period and cannot, I think, be reckoned as a genuine mythical product. But if you like these wall paintings, we can easily drive thither, and you will then, I think, have seen the chief works of Raphael, any of which it were a pity to omit in a visit to Rome. He is the painter who has been held to combine the most complete grace of form with sublimity of expression. Such, at least, I have gathered to be the opinion of cognoscenti. This kind of answer, given in a measured official tone, as of a clergyman reading according to the rubric, did not help to justify the glories of the eternal city, or to give her the hope that if she knew more about them, the world would be joyously illuminated for her. There is hardly any contact more depressing to a young, ardent creature than that of a mind in which years full of knowledge seem to have issued in a blank absence of interest or sympathy. On other subjects, indeed, Mr. Casaubon showed a tenacity of occupation and an eagerness which are usually regarded as the effect of enthusiasm, and Dorothea was anxious to follow this spontaneous direction of his thoughts, instead of being made to feel that she dragged him away from it. But she was gradually ceasing to expect with her former delightful confidence that she should see any wide opening where she followed him. Poor Mr. Casaubon himself was lost among small closets and winding stairs, and in an agitated dimness about the Cabeiri, or in an exposure of other mythologists' ill-considered parallels, easily lost sight of any purpose which had prompted him to these labours. With his taper stuck before him, he forgot the absence of windows, and in bitter manuscript remarks on other men's notions about the solar deities, he had become indifferent to the sunlight. These characteristics, fixed and unchangeable as bone in Mr. Casaubon, might have remained longer unfelt by Dorothea if she had been encouraged to pour forth her girlish and womanly feeling, if he would have held her hands between his and listened with a delight of tenderness and understanding to all the little histories which made up her experience, and would have given her the same sort of intimacy in return, so that the past life of each could be included in their mutual knowledge and affection, or if she could have fed her affection with those childlike caresses which are the bent of every sweet woman who has begun by showering kisses on the hard pate of her bald doll, creating a happy soul within that woodenness from the wealth of her own love. That was Dorothea's bent, with all her yearning to know what was afar from her and to be widely benignant. She had ardour enough for what was near, to have kissed Mr. Casaubon's coat sleeve, or to have caressed his shoe latchet, if he would have made any other sign of acceptance than pronouncing her with his unfailing propriety to be of a most affectionate and truly feminine nature, indicating at the same time, by politely reaching a chair for her, that he regarded these manifestations as rather crude and startling. Having made his clerical toilette with due care in the morning, he was prepared only for those amenities of life which were suited to the well-adjusted stiff cravat of the period, and to a mind weighed with unpublished matter. I'm afraid I strayed a little onto the next page, but that's because I couldn't help it. This has got to be, to me, the strongest indication, the top of page 97, that there is nothing happening on this honeymoon that one would expect to be happening on a honeymoon. Absolutely not. That every time Dorothea tries slightly, by slight little things, to to kiss a coat sleeve, I mean, for goodness sake, or to caress a shoe latchet, meaning that she must at some point have left her chair. The picture I get is that she's either kneeling or leaning over him and just beginning to express the tamest sort of physical affection. She's trying to touch, and he is complimenting her on how wonderfully affectionate and feminine she is, but at the same time he's getting her a chair so that she can sit away from him, so that there isn't any more of that, because the only activities he wants to engage in, as it says, he was prepared only for those amenities of life which were suited to the well-adjusted stiff cravat, meaning he wasn't really ready to do anything that would mess up his clothing. Wow. Okay. So it's a distressing picture. And if we go back to the page before where I started reading, the mythical illusions are also very telling. Mr. Casaubon is dismissive of the story of Cupid and Psyche. He won't even allow that it might be true myth. He considers it to be some later romantic invention, a literary invention, rather than something based further back, in the things he's studying. He doesn't even want to allow for that. And that's amazing because, of course, the story of Cupid and Psyche is one of the most erotically charged true love stories. Psyche, of course, was an embodiment of physical perfection. She was so beautiful that her father couldn't get her married off because her other suitors were just intimidated by her. They didn't think that they were good enough for her. And he had to go to the oracle at Delphi and say, what should I do? And they said, well, you need to take your daughter at night up to the top of some barren cliff and leave her there. And she'll be married, but it will be to some hideous beast. But in fact, what happened to Psyche was that she was lured by Cupid or Eros into a building that was his home, and in the darkness she encountered the god without knowing what it was that she was with, and they spent the night together, several nights together. They were in love, and then she finally couldn't resist anymore and got a light so that she could see who it was that she was actually married to, and found out that she'd become the wife of a deity, but which is hardly what we're talking about when we think of Dorothea and Casaubon's marriage. That's different. In that one, during the engagement, Dorothea thought that she was going to marry something the equivalent of a deity in terms of someone much, much higher and more perfect than her. And I think now, during her honeymoon, as she is effectively shining a light on her husband, she's finding that she's not married to anything higher at all. And she's finding it difficult to make any emotional attachment to him because he doesn't want any kind of attachment to her. And if we skip down to the bottom of that page, in addition to Dagon and fish deities, Mr. Casaubon at the moment is also fixated with the Cabeiri. Now, the Cabeiri they're one of these obscure deities, Samothracian, which I haven't even gone into, so I'm just using that word. If you want to look further, please do. They're also said to guide sailors, so again, we've got an associated with water. They were also considered fertility gods at some time, but again, the video link I'm going to leave in my description box, it's worth watching, if only for the number of times that the narrator reminds us that we don't really have a lot of solid information about who these deities really are, how they were worshipped, or where they originally came from. So here we are again, another hopeless search by Mr. Casaubon to make sense out of something that there even now there isn't enough information to say a great deal about. And Dorothea is intelligent enough to realize that instead of wide open spaces becoming hers, if she follows where her husband is thinking, instead he just seems to be wandering around in a maze. Or I don't know, do you ever have those kind of dreams where you're in a big interior space like an office building or a very large building with lots of corridors and doors and floors, and you're moving in and out of things but you're not getting anywhere? And I'm reminded of those kind of dreams when Dorothea describes her husband's thinking that, and I'll go back to the passage, how Mr. Casaubon himself was lost among small closets and winding stairs, and in an agitated dimness about the Cabeiri, because there's nothing there. It's just wandering around in all these little tiny corridors, getting absolutely nowhere. And for someone as intelligent as Dorothea, she's going to start to realize this isn't worth the time. As yet, she's just beginning to suspect. We're going to read on, and I think this is the most significant paragraph when talking about Dorothea's sexual awakening that she's not consciously aware of. And by a sad contradiction, Dorothea's ideas and resolves seemed like melting ice floating and lost in the warm flood of which they had been but another form. She was humiliated to find herself a mere victim of feeling, as if she could know nothing except through that medium. All her strength was scattered in fits of agitation, of struggle, of despondency, and then again in visions of more complete renunciation, transforming all hard conditions into duty. Poor Dorothea! She was certainly troublesome to herself chiefly, but this morning, for the first time, she had been troublesome to Mr. Casaubon. She had begun, while they were taking coffee, with a determination to shake off what she inwardly called her selfishness, and turned a face all cheerful attention to her husband when he said, "My dear Dorothea, we must now think of all that is yet left undone as a preliminary to our departure. I would fain have returned home earlier, that we might have been at Lowick for the Christmas. But my inquiries have been protracted beyond their anticipated period. I trust, however, that the time here has not been passed unpleasantly to you. Among the sights of Europe, that of Rome has ever been held as one of the most striking and, in some respects, edifying. I well remember that I considered it an epoch in my life when I visited it for the first time after the fall of Napoleon, an event which opened the continent to travellers. Indeed, I think it is one among several cities to which an extreme hyperbole has been applied. See Rome and die. But in your case, I would propose an emendation and say, see Rome as a bride and live thenceforth as a happy wife. Mr. Casaubon pronounced this little speech with the most conscientious intention, blinking a little and swaying his head up and down, and concluding with a smile. He had not found marriage a rapturous state, but he had no idea of being anything else than an irreproachable husband who would make a charming young woman as happy as she deserved to be. I hope you are thoroughly satisfied with our stay. I mean, with the result so far as your studies are concerned, said Dorothea, trying to keep her mind fixed on what most affected her husband. Yes, said Mr. Casaubon, with that peculiar pitch of voice which makes the word half a negative. I have been led farther than I had foreseen, and various subjects for annotation have presented themselves, which, though I have no direct need of them, I could not pretermit. The task, notwithstanding the assistance of my amanuensis, has been a somewhat laborious one, but your societies happily prevented me from that too continuous prosecution of thought beyond the hours of study which has been the snare of my solitary life. I am very glad that my presence has made any difference to you, said Dorothea, who had a vivid memory of evenings in which she had supposed that Mr. Casaubon's mind had gone too deep during the day to be able to get to the surface again. I fear there was a little temper in her reply. I hope, when we get to Lowick, I shall be more useful to you, and be able to enter a little more into what interests you. Doubtless, my dear, said Mr. Casaubon with a slight bow. The notes I have here made will want sifting, and you can, if you please, extract them under my direction. And all your notes, said Dorothea, whose heart had already burned within her on this subject, so that now she could not help speaking with her tongue. All those rows of volumes, will you not now do what you used to speak of? Will you not make up your mind what part of them you will use and begin to write the book which will make your vast knowledge useful to the world? I will write to your dictation, or I will copy and extract what you tell me. I can be of no other use. Dorothea, in a most unaccountable, darkly feminine manner, ended with a slight sob and eyes full of tears. The excessive feeling manifested would alone have been highly disturbing to Mr. Casaubon, but there were other reasons why Dorothea's words were among the most cutting and irritating to him that she could have been impelled to use. She was as blind to his inward troubles as he to hers. She had not yet learned those hidden conflicts in her husband which claim our pity. She had not yet listened patiently to his heartbeats, but only felt her own was beating violently. In Mr. Casaubon's ear, Dorothea's voice gave loud, emphatic iteration to those muffled suggestions of consciousness which it was possible to explain as mere fancy, the illusion of exaggerated sensitiveness. Always when such suggestions are unmistakably repeated from without, they are resisted as cruel and unjust. We are angered even by the full acceptance of our humiliating confessions. How much more by hearing in hard, distinct syllables from the lips of a near observer those confused murmurs which we try to call morbid and strive against, as if they were the oncoming of numbness. And this cruel, outward accuser was there in the shape of a wife, nay, a young bride, who, instead of observing his abundant pen scratches, an amplitude of paper, with the uncritical awe of an elegant-minded canary bird, seemed to present herself as a spy, watching everything with a malign power of inference. Here, towards this particular point of the compass, Mr. Casaubon had a sensitiveness to match Dorothea's, and an equal quickness to imagine more than the fact. He had formerly observed with approbation her capacity for worshipping the right object. He now foresaw with sudden terror that this capacity might be replaced by presumption, this worship by the most exasperating of all criticism, that which sees vaguely a great many fine ends and has not the least notion of what it costs to reach them. Sorry, I got a bit carried away reading there. I think that whole build-up to the argument that we're going to read is fascinating. It's fascinating because Mr. Casaubon has admitted right away, early on in their interaction, that he's still not happy with his time at Rome. There's still so much he needs to do. Dorothea she has not yet, as page 200 tells us, she doesn't know her husband really well. She doesn't know where his points of sensitivity are. But his greatest point of sensitivity is that he still doesn't feel ready to start writing a book. He's still just got loads and loads and loads of notes, but he's done absolutely nothing toward beginning a book, a publishable work. He already has murmurs, those muffled suggestions of consciousness. He gets his own inner voice every once in a while telling him that just maybe everything he spent all this time on is a complete waste, that he still doesn't have any coherent idea of what he's going to put into a book. And he does not need an outside person to repeat those doubts, because they're already very, as much as he tries to hold them down, as much as he tries to call them his exaggerated sensitiveness, nevertheless, they're there. And all they need is for someone to repeat similar sentiments. And poor Dorothea, she doesn't realize she's done it, but she has. She keeps telling him, will you now do? I mean, I've underlined some passages and they're worded like accusations. Poor Dorothea doesn't realize that, but she's using those kind of words. Will you not now do? Will you not now do? And will you not make up your mind and begin to write the book? It's like, oh, and those are the words, you just know, those are the words Mr. Casaubon's hearing. He's not hearing her sadness, her pleading, her, I will write to your dictation. I will copy and extract what you tell me. I can be of no other use. And of course she starts to cry then, but he doesn't know what she's upset about. He doesn't realize what she's upset about is being so useless to him. All he can hear are those accusatory statements. Will you not? Will you not? Are you going to get on with this work or what? Are you going to disappoint me? That's what he's hearing, even though that's not exactly what she intends to say. And it's interesting to go into his psychology then, all the mechanics in his mind reacting to this. All she is doing is she's waking up the ghosts inside his own head, all those little whispers and voices. She's just making them stronger. And he doesn't need that. And so, of course, now he's wound up as well. And it's interesting because we don't tend to think of Mr. Casaubon as sensitive or emotional, but now we're going to find that she's managed to get underneath him and poke at something really vital. And unfortunately now she's going to get back from him some of the passion that previously she was the only person expressing in this marriage. For the first time since Dorothea had known him, Mr. Casaubon's face had a quick, angry flush upon it. "My love," he said, with irritation reined in by propriety, "you may rely upon me for knowing the times and the seasons, adapted to the different stages of a work which is not to be measured by the facile conjectures of ignorant onlookers. It had been easy for me to gain a temporary effect by a mirage, a baseless opinion, but it is ever the trial of the scrupulous explorer to be saluted with the impatient scorn of chatterers, who attempt only the smallest achievements, being indeed equipped for no other, and it were well if all such could be admonished to discriminate judgments of which the true subject matter lies entirely beyond their reach, from those of which the elements may be compassed by a narrow and superficial survey. This speech was delivered with an energy and readiness quite unusual with Mr. Casaubon. It was not indeed entirely an improvisation, but it had taken shape in inward colloquy, and rushed out like the round grains from a fruit, when sudden heat cracks it. Dorothea was not only his wife, she was a personification of that shallow world which surrounds the ill-appreciated or desponding author. Dorothea was indignant in her turn. Had she not been repressing everything in her except the desire to enter into some fellowship with her husband's chief interests? My judgment was a very superficial one, such as I am capable of forming, she answered, with a prompt resentment that needed no rehearsal. You showed me the rows of notebooks. You have often spoken of them. You have often said that they wanted digesting. But I never heard you speak of the writing that is to be published. Those were very simple facts, and my judgment went no farther. I only begged you to let me be of some good to you. Dorothea rose to leave the table, and Mr. Casaubon made no reply, taking up a letter which lay beside him as if to re-peruse it. Both were shocked at their mutual situation, that each should have betrayed anger towards the other. If they had been at home, settled at Lowick in ordinary life among their neighbours, the clash would have been less embarrassing. But on a wedding journey, the express object of which is to isolate two people on the ground that they are all the world to each other, the sense of disagreement is, to say the least, confounding and stultifying. To have changed your longitude extensively and placed yourself in a moral solitude in order to have small explosions, to find conversation difficult, and to hand a glass of water without looking, can hardly be regarded as satisfactory fulfillment even to the toughest minds. To Dorothea's inexperienced sensitiveness, it seemed like a catastrophe, changing all prospects, and to Mr. Casaubon it was a new pain, he never having been on a wedding journey before, or found himself in that close union which was more of a subjection than he had been able to imagine, since this charming young bride not only obliged him to much consideration on her behalf, which he had sedulously given, but turned out to be capable of agitating him cruelly just where he most needed soothing, instead of getting a soft fence against the cold, shadowy, unapplausive audience of his life. Had he only given it a more substantial presence? Neither of them felt it possible to speak again at present. To have reversed a previous arrangement and declined to go out would have been a show of persistent anger which Dorothea's conscience shrank from, seeing that she already began to feel herself guilty. However just her indignation might be, her ideal was not to claim justice, but to give tenderness. So when the carriage came to the door, she drove with Mr. Casaubon to the Vatican, walked with him through the stony avenue of inscriptions, and when she parted with him at the entrance to the library, went on through the museum out of mere listlessness as to what was around her. She had not spirit to turn round and say that she would drive anywhere. It was when Mr. Casaubon was quitting her that Naumann had first seen her, and he had entered the long gallery of sculpture at the same time with her, but here Naumann had to await Ladislaw, with whom he was to settle a bet of champagne about an enigmatical, medieval-looking figure there. After they had examined the figure, and he had walked on, finishing their dispute, they had parted, Ladislaw lingering behind, while Naumann had gone into the Hall of Statues, where he again saw Dorothea, and saw her in that brooding abstraction which made her pose remarkable. She did not really see the streak of sunlight on the floor more than she saw the statues. She was inwardly seeing the light of years to come in her own home and over the English fields and elms and hedge-bordered highroads, and feeling that the way in which they might be filled with joyful devotedness was not so clear to her as it had been. But in Dorothea's mind there was a current into which all thought and feeling were apt sooner or later to flow, the reaching forward of the whole consciousness towards the fullest truth, the least partial good. There was clearly something better than anger and despondency. Oh man, I got so lost in that reading that I realized that there was something I didn't mention from back on page 198. And that was where I started the reading there. And I was saying, oh, this paragraph, it's really important. It's really important. And it is, because it talks about Dorothea's ideas and resolves seemed like melting ice, floating and lost in the warm flood. And it talks about her feeling like a victim of feeling, that she was just now something lost in a current, in a flood, in a movement of her emotions. And here was where immediately my mind went back to the Mill on the Floss, because for Maggie Tulliver in the Mill on the Floss, this is where she struggles as well. She's a highly feeling person, and when her feelings capture her, she had in her youth often just gone with them, and she's trying in her maturity to get a hold of that, of course, until she reaches a point where those feelings are erotic, and then they are very powerful, and fight though she does, she eventually succumbs. And I'm going to read you just a short passage from The Mill on the Floss. The scene is very familiar to those who've read the book. Maggie Tulliver develops a strong attraction almost immediately to the fiancé of her cousin, who has also been a very close friend. And it's horrible because she can sense that this attraction is mutually strong, and she's frightened of it. She doesn't know what to do with it. She resists for a long, long time, during which the three of them, her cousin, the fiancé, and her, they spend time together indoors, also outdoors though, because they have a little punting boat, and so they go up and down the river on little jaunts together. But it's clear that all this time, this incredible attraction is building. There comes a point where the fiancé himself, Stephen Guest, goes and sees Maggie privately and confesses that he feels that strongly, and he thinks really they are the ones that should get married. He should break off his engagement with his cousin. Maggie does not want that. Unfortunately, there then comes one of those incidents that only a novel can create, where, as it happens, Maggie and Stephen end up alone. They weren't supposed to be alone. There's supposed to be two other people with them. Those people don't show up, as it happens, and they were planning to go out on the boat down the river. Stephen tries to persuade Maggie, let's go anyway. She resists, but you can almost feel that it's reached a critical point where all the emotion that she's trying to hold back, just like floodwater, it's too much for her. And so she surrenders to the feeling. So does Stephen. They go on the boat together, and that's the passage I'm going to read, just so you can sense that same fluid metaphor for attraction. And just so you know, in case you also have this copy, I am reading from the Oxford Classics edition of The Mill on the Floss paperback version, and starting on page 429. Let us go, Stephen murmured, entreatingly, rising and taking her hand to raise her too. We shall not be long together. And they went. Maggie felt that she was being led down the garden among the roses, being helped with firm, tender care into the boat, having the cushion and the cloak arranged for her feet and her parasol opened for her, which she had forgotten, all by this stronger presence that seemed to bear her along without any act of her own will, like the added self which comes with the sudden exalting influence of a strong tonic. And she felt nothing else. Memory was excluded. They glided rapidly along, Stephen rowing, helped by the backward flowing tide, past the toftened trees and houses, on between the silent sunny fields and pastures, which seemed filled with a natural joy that had no reproach for theirs. The breath of the young, unwearied day, the delicious rhythmic dip of the oars, the fragmentary song of a passing bird, heard now and then, as if it were only the overflowing of brimful gladness, the sweet solitude of a twofold consciousness that was mingled into one by that grave, untiring gaze, which need not be averted. What else could there be in their minds for the first hour? Some low, subdued, languid exclamation of love came from Stephen from time to time as he went on rowing idly, half automatically. Otherwise they spoke no word, for what could words have been but an inlet to thought? And thought did not belong to that enchanted haze in which they were enveloped. It belonged to the past and the future that lay outside the haze. Maggie was only dimly conscious of the banks as they passed them and dwelt with no recognition on the villages. She knew there were several to be passed before they reached Luckreth, where they always stopped and left the boat. At all times she was so liable to fits of absence that she was likely enough to let her waymarks pass unnoticed. But at last Stephen, who had been rowing more and more idly, ceased to row, laid down the oars, folded his arms, and looked down on the water as if watching the pace at which the boat glided without his help. Hopefully you can see that when I was therefore reading how Dorothea's resolves seemed like melting ice floating and lost in the warm flood of which they had been but another form. And she talks about having fits of agitation in the same way. I don't think agitation was used, but there was another fit, this feeling of just being disconnected and lost in the flow of things, just like Maggie and Stephen were for that boating trip. And again, to me, it just emphasizes for her an erotic awakening that isn't being satisfied by her marriage. And that, along with emotional dissatisfaction, there really isn't any marriage then. I can see, but I felt that paragraph was really telling that she's sort of coming a little bit unhinged. This would explain the tears as well. There's a lot of feeling there that she thought would be part of being married that is no part of her marriage at all. But we must return now to their argument, their first show of anger to each other. After we talked about Dorothea's accusing remarks, which she did not realize were hitting Mr. Casaubon unconsciously, digging up bad little voices in his head that he was trying so hard to push down again. And his attack on her, what's interesting is it says it was not entirely an improvisation. In other words, in his mind, he'd given this argument. He'd imaginarily had this argument ready for the people who might criticize him. He'd well rehearsed this, and maybe that's why it sounds so eloquent. It's certainly lots and lots of well-constructed sentences that he's obviously now reciting, but reciting as if he was going to address some other enemy. To say these things to your wife, to effectively, the insults that he gives, he's putting her in the same group as the ignorant onlookers, the chatterers who attempt only the smallest achievements, being indeed equipped for no other, or talks about subject matter lying entirely beyond their reach and having narrow and superficial surveys. All he's doing is just heaping insults on her in reaction to her pleading. Personally, I think Dorothea did as well as she could in the circumstances, because they both exchanged very unkind comments, whether they realize it or not. But Dorothea goes back and just starts stating facts, and I like that she does that. First of all, she agrees with him. Her judgment was superficial. She's not capable of anything else. But then she just starts quoting facts at him. She said, "You showed me the row of notebooks. You've often spoken of them. You've often said they wanted digesting. But I never heard you speak of the writing that is to be published." She said those were very simple facts, and my judgment went no further. I guess what she's trying to say is, you obviously think that I am judging you for whether or not you've written this book or when you're going to write it. I was not. You will be writing a book sometime, and I just wanted to help. And with that, she gets up and leaves the table, and they do that horrible thing that married couples do when they disagree, when there is always that bit of silence, that tense silence that follows, which, some couples never quite resolve, and good ones, They get there eventually by some means or other. But it's sad because, it says down here to have changed your longitude extensively. They've gone from England down to Rome, to have gone on this whole great big journey. And just so that you can sit here in your lovely solitude together and have small explosions, it says, to find conversations difficult, or, and this is really sad, to hand a glass of water without looking. Yeah. To have that happening already can hardly be regarded, it says, as satisfactory fulfillment, even to the toughest minds. No, it cannot. There's something very, very wrong if there's this kind of argument happening so soon. It means there hasn't been sharing, which is quite clear here. Eliot says it, they don't know each other. They seriously don't know each other. And now they're getting under each other's skin really easily because of it. I'm going to go back one page just because there was a description of how Mr. Casaubon's well-rehearsed argument burst forth from him, which I think merits looking at. I can't believe that, for example, David from Polyglot Reader, if you happen to be watching this Middlemarch meditation, I feel sure that your attention was drawn by this, so I feel I ought to give it some attention. But if we go back, it does say that it was not indeed entirely an improvisation, his response, but had taken shape in inward colloquy and rushed out like the fine grains from a fruit when sudden heat cracks it. And my immediate response when I read that metaphor was to go, and to try to think of something that I knew. I thought, I don't know that I can think of a fruit that cracks open, but I think the word fruit is being used in a broader sense than I would use it now. Now I see it as a specific type of botany that usually contains juicy, pulpy flesh. That might not be the case here. But what is being discussed is a botanical term known as dehiscence. And you'll put it up on screen here because it's important. You'll have to learn it right. So this is a very small botany lesson from someone who knows about this much. Okay? So dehiscence is describing plants which they develop seeds internally in some kind of structure in the plant. And that structure where the seeds are concentrated, it has a built-in weakness. And that's so that when the plant is mature, a little bit of stress splits open that structure and then exposes the seeds and allows them to scatter naturally. Mr. Casaubon, it appears, is dehiscent. So he's anticipated a personal attack for a long, long time. And what he's done in preparation to defend himself, he has prepared arguments. And these arguments are like his seeds, and they've grown inside him unspoken. And Dorothea's inquiry has provided just enough natural stress to split open that seed pod, if you will. Poppies are a good example. Poppies, if you want an example, but look up the term dehiscence. You'll get all kinds of plant examples and probably some that you're more familiar with. I think milkweed, I saw milkweed as one. I thought, oh yes, I know milkweed. Yes. So, but I think it's interesting that they used that botanical thing because it also only happens when the plant is mature, i.e. old and nearly dying, a bit dried out. But didn't Mrs. Cadwallader use that same term? Didn't she call him a dried bladder with seeds banging around inside it? In the same way, if Mr. Casaubon is dehiscent, then he is an old dried seed pod ready to split open and give out his seeds because it's time for the parent plant to die and the seeds to make new plants. It's that time of his life. So it's just dropping even more hints about how close he is to the wrong end of life, so to speak. So we end with the couple still going ahead, traveling together to the Vatican, Dorothea parting with Mr. Casaubon as he's about to go into the Vatican library, and then she just wanders. She hasn't agreed to be driven anywhere, and so she just is listlessly wandering around the museum, not really seeing what she's looking at, in spite what Naumann thinks as he sees her contemplating, because of course we then meet up with the event of the earlier part of the chapter when she was spotted by Naumann and by Ladislaw. But all she can think about now is the future, and where is she going to find her source of joy that she thought was going to be so automatic in this marriage. And the chapter ends significantly by saying, in Dorothea's mind there was a current into which all thought and feeling were apt sooner or later to flow. to my mind, that's a warning. That's a warning, because she is still in this flow state, this liquid, highly emotive, somewhat erotically charged state. And that's a weird state to be in. And it means that her energies could flow towards something else if they see an opportunity. And I think that's a foreshadowing of what is to come. But that brings us to the end of chapter 20. In a week's time, we will start chapter 21, and I look forward to seeing you then, everybody. In the meantime, take care. Bye-bye.